Our last set of notes for Chapter 7 is Section 3 that looks at the role of government. Um, a lot of this will seem a little bit like a review from your U.S. history classes when you studied especially Teddy Roosevelt and his role as the trust buster. All right, so the government did step into the market economy, especially into the late 1800s when we started to see the buildup of trusts and monopolies. You might remember those being formed by J.P. Morgan and Carnegie and Rockefeller, essentially, or robber barons. The whole point for the government stepping in was to break up these trusts and these monopolies. As you know from our last section, that one of the reasons markets fail is inadequate competition. So the government stepped in to break up the monopolies to prevent market failure due to inadequate competition. The way the government stepped in was by passing legislation that was considered to be antitrust or anti-monopoly. The first major piece of legislation aimed to stop the creation of monopolies was the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was followed by the Clayton Antitrust Act in 1914. Basically, the Clayton Antitrust Act is going to plug the holes that businesses found in the Sherman Antitrust Act. Businesses are always looking to make money, so they did find ways around the Sherman Antitrust Act. The Clayton Antitrust Act is what prevented them from using these loopholes. It also added another provision, which was businesses could not use price discrimination. This was especially going on in railroads, and different railroad lines were charging customers a different price for the same product. That if the train brought your product one direction, it would, or you brought your product one direction, it would cost a certain amount of money, and when they returned, they would charge a different amount for the same, length of a train trip. Other pieces of antitrust legislation were the Federal Trade Commission Act in 1914. This added a new power for the federal government, which were cease and desist orders. Basically, the government could step in and force a company to stop doing a particular action that was considered to create some type of restriction on trade. So the whole company wasn't shut down for being a monopoly, but certain actions by companies that could be ruled to restrain trade, they could force those companies to stop any of those practices. In 1936, the Robinson-Patman Act again strengthens the Clayton Antitrust Act, again plugging the holes that businesses found in the act. The government does allow monopolies. We looked at those in Section 1. We know they allow technological monopolies and our natural monopolies with our utilities, our geographical monopolies. With regards to small businesses, if the government allows a legal monopoly to exist, they will regulate it. Basically, what their regulations are, the goal is to make sure that the price and quality that's offered by that company that's now a monopoly, that price and quality would be the same as if there were competition. So they prevent those monopolies from price gouging, and also for providing a service that is substandard when it comes to quality. Who is responsible for enforcing the regulations? It would be public commissions and also private agencies. An example of a private agency that regulates would be the Federal Reserve. Their job is to especially regulate banking. The government also gets involved with internalizing externalities. We learned in Section 2 that externalities were one reason for market failure. So the government gets involved to stop market failure for the reason of negative externalities. When the government internalizes externalities, they're basically forcing the producer and the customer to pay the cost of the negative externality rather than the third party. So our example with the Sriracha article, the Sriracha factory was forced to put in air filters that basically scrubbed the air that was being emitted by the factory of any of the pepper oils, and it was the company who was forced to pay for that improvement. And as we learned in Chapter 6 with supply, if the producer has to pay more, they would pass that on to the customer. So through internalizing externalities, the producer and the customer, not the third party, pay for the negative externality. Another way internalizing externalities can occur is through taxation. If we look at a business that is polluting, the government may tax them at a higher rate, and then that money turned and used to clean up the pollution. The government gets involved again in our economy when it comes to public disclosure. Again, one of our reasons for market failure is inadequate information. So government getting involved with public disclosure is a way to prevent market failure due to inadequate information. Public disclosure is the government requiring businesses to make certain amount of information available to the public. We see it, for example, with stocks. If you're a corporation that sells stock, the Securities and Exchange Commission forces the company to disclose its information to its shareholders, and the shareholders receive reports from the company. Banks also are forced to report to the Federal Reserve or the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation the position of their bank. Another example of public disclosure would be truth in advertising laws. Sellers are forbidden by law from making claims about their product that are not true. The government also can get involved by forcing the idea of indirect disclosure, where they are just basically getting involved to make that information acquisition easier for people. One of the ways they can do so is by supporting development of the internet and access to the internet. One way that we see this maybe is in public libraries, that people who may not have access to internet at home can come to a public library and be able to get onto the internet and read business conditions. They can read government documents, government studies, reports to become more informed. Overall, our government justifies its interference in our economy, saying that the good definitely outweighs the bad. There are four major reasons the government interferes. One is to promote and encourage competition, because as we know, that consumers, we want that competition so that prices stay low and quality stays high. The government is trying to prevent monopolies and reduce the cost of imperfect competition, basically to make sure that you have enough companies competing for our business, that we end up with all the products we need offered at fair and reasonable prices. The government does interfere when it comes to monopolies that they have established. They want to protect the customers from unfair business practices. And then the government also justifies interference in our economy to fulfill the need for public goods. We discussed public goods. The government has decided that there are certain goods that the government must step in and offer to the public, because left alone, the free market won't produce the public good because it's just not a money maker for them. We said examples of public goods might be libraries, police, fire, and the military. So those are the four reasons our government advocates for its interference. All right, so that concludes our Chapter 7 notes. Please make sure if you have any questions on anything presented that you send it to me so we can clarify this information. Hopefully this was helpful, being able to hear it explained rather than just read. So I will be checking in with you guys soon. Take care.